What is up, my YouTube family? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, then it's just welcome to my channel. Not welcome back. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button because you will not be disappointed unless your taste level is lacking. And if that's the case, then go find your beef. There's plenty out there. Y'all, today we are discussing the Keddie cabin murders. But before we get into the video, I do have to quickly give a thank you to Scentbird for sponsoring today's video. Scentbird is a fragrance subscription service that allows you to try new designer fragrances each month for just $17. Now, with each fragrance that you choose, you'll receive a 30-day supply to try it out before committing to a full-size bottle. Or if you're like me and you just prefer smaller bottles that are easier to store, it's also a good option for you. They have over 600 designer brands to choose from, and they range from high-end designers that cost anywhere from $300 to $500 a bottle to more affordable brands on the lower end, and also indie brands. So if you don't like to go out and smell like everybody else that has all the popular fragrances, you can find a really good one. And they have fragrances for everyone: perfumes, colognes, as well as a lot of unisex options. The four that I chose for this month are Versace Yellow Diamond. I love Versace fragrances, and when I first put this on, before I even looked at the top notes, I was like, this smells like a beautiful white flower. I also detected a little citrus. Look at me knowing a little bit, because looking at the top notes, there is in fact a beautiful white flower, as well as lemon, mimosa, pear, and bergamot. I also got the Kensie Zest for Life, which is very fruity. I actually like layering the Kensie on top of the white diamond. I love to layer my fragrances to lessen the chances of me smelling like somebody else. The tropical fruits, the pineapple and the mango, pair very well with the citrus inside of Versace Yellow Diamond and add a great little touch. I love these two together. I also received Chloe Love Story. I love Chloe. That's one of my favorite fragrance brands, and has notes of cedarwood, orange blossom, jasmine, and it also has very floral notes. And then I also have this one by Valaya. It too smells like a bouquet of white flowers, but it also has bergamot, white peach, musk, and vanilla. It is a great option as well. I recommend any of the four that I got. Make sure you click the link or scan this QR code and use my code Vaughn for 55% off of your first month, which is only about $8 for your first month. Again, thank you Scentbird for sponsoring today's video, and let's get into this story. In 1979, Sue Sharp flees Connecticut with her 5 children to escape her very abusive husband and moves to Quincy, California to live in her brother's trailer. Now, once Sue is able to relax and comfortably settle into their place of refuge, Sue begins to consider ways to really plant her roots and officially start their new lives there. She takes up a typing class and works part-time as a means to support her and her children, saving up her money for them to eventually afford to live in a larger place. She looks up when she learns of a family resort in the nearby town of Keddie that's being converted into low-income housing. By the fall of the next year, the construction is all done, and by this time, Sue has saved up enough money to afford a bigger place, so she is very excited when she is able to move into cabin 28. Sue and the children are ecstatic because there is so much more space in this cabin compared to the trailer, and no shade to the brother, but the cabin is a little bit nicer. The town itself, however, is a little less developed than Quincy, or a lot less developed. It is very small, but small, quiet, and secluded can be a very good thing, especially when you do not want to be found. So we have 36-year-old Sue, the mom, 15-year-old John, 14-year-old Sheila, 12-year-old Tina, 10-year-old Rick, and Greg, who is 5. Now, on April 11th of 1981, at around 11:30 a.m., Sue and 2 of the children are leaving from visiting with another family that they're friends with, headed to pick up Rick from his baseball tryouts in Quincy, which is, of course, the nearby town that they had originally lived in. And while she is there in Quincy, she sees her 15-year-old John and his friend Dana hitchhiking back to town from Quincy. So, of course, she has the kids join her, and they all just ride back to Keddie together. Now, at around 3:30 p.m., John and Dana hitchhike back to Quincy for some sort of social gathering with their friends. This same evening, 14-year-old Sheila has plans to spend the night with the Seabold family who lives in cabin 27. She leaves home a little after 8 p.m. to go over for her sleepover, and her sister Tina, who is 12, was there watching movies. Sheila tells Tina that their mom wants her home by 10 p.m. So at 9:55, Tina heads home for the night. Now, with what everyone has going on this evening, that left Sue at home with her two youngest boys, ages 10 and 5, and they also had a friend over that evening, 12-year-old Justin Smart. Sue was very friendly with Justin's mother, and oftentimes they would allow the boys to sleep over back and forth. The Smarts also live in one of the cabins. The following morning, Sheila wakes up pretty early. She gets her things and she heads back home from the next door neighbor's house and finds a very gruesome scene. Her mother, Sue, her 15-year-old brother, John, and his 17-year-old friend, Dana, had all been bound, gagged, mutilated, and none of them are still alive. And this was a very horrific scene to have encountered. Sue was lying on the floor on her side, and she is completely naked from the waist down. She's also deeply gagged with a bandana and her underwear, and there's tape over her mouth. There are no signs of any sexual trauma despite her being unclothed, and she is very oddly the only one with defensive wounds, showing that she had attempted to fight back. There is blood splatter all over the walls, all over the ceiling, and even on the porch railing outside. Now, in one of the bedrooms, the two youngest boys, John and Greg, as well as their friend Justin Smart, are all unharmed and had apparently slept through the entire incident, which happened just feet away from their beds. Sheila instantly runs back to the neighbor's house. She informs them of what she had seen. The teenage son, Jamie Sebo, goes back to get the boys out of the house before they wake up to that scene. He goes to the bedroom window, tapping on it to wake them up, and helps all three of them out of the window to be spared what Sheila had just seen. But 12-year-old Tina is missing, and her bed is bloodstained. The police arrive, and immediately they determine that this could not have been carried out by just one person. There had to be at least two people to subdue all of these people. When they speak with the three young boys who had seemingly slept through it, all three of them say that they had not heard anything, any kind of disturbance over the night. There were knife marks in the wall connected to their bedroom. It's highly unlikely that they didn't hear anything with how violent this was. Things just continue to become more strange because despite how messy and chaotic the scene was, the assailants somehow managed to do all of this and leave behind no evidence on anything. And there was blood on just about everything. Patterns in the blood smear show that all three of the victims had been moved post-mortem. Sue was barefoot with blood on the bottoms of her feet. The other two had shoes on that also had blood on the bottom of their feet. John was closest to the door, and he was lying on his back face up. His hands were very bloodied and bound with medical tape, and his throat had been cut. His friend Dana was on the floor lying right beside him, but face down. His head was completely bashed in and slightly propped up on a pillow, and Dana had also been strangled. Now, Dana's ankles were bound with electrical wire, and they were also tied to John's ankles that were also bound so that the two were connected. There was a claw hammer used as well as a bent steak knife on the floor. The scene was just complete and utter chaos. Once hours go by and they are still unable to locate 12-year-old Tina, they solicit the help of the FBI. Local law enforcement was completely puzzled. They cannot establish a motive. They can't think of who would want to harm these people. They can't make sense of the crime or any of the details that they have. It's just all so bizarre. The only thing they can come up with is that it was some random act of extreme cruelty. But this seemed really personal. There's no signs of forced entry at any entry point of the home, but they do notice an unidentified fingerprint on the handrail for the stairs at the back of the cabin. The phone is off the hook. All of the light switches inside the cabin were turned off. All of the drapes were drawn. It's very obvious to them that this had taken place over an extended period of time. This is not something that someone came in really quickly and had done. So it's very likely that somebody heard something. They go and speak to all of the neighbors in the surrounding cabins, and none of them heard a thing. But one of them offers investigators a very interesting tidbit of information. A claw hammer had been stolen from his toolbox, and this comes from Martin Smart, Justin's stepfather. Now, as they are speaking to more neighbors, the couple in cabin 16, which is a little further than all of the other neighbors they had spoken to, they tell investigators that between 1:30 and 2 a.m., they had heard muffled screams. But unable to pinpoint where these screams are coming from, they decide to go back to bed. Now, this, of course, also strikes investigators as odd because how is it the cabin 16 heard screams, but none of the closer cabins heard anything, and the children inside the home heard nothing as well. Now, some of the neighbors recount seeing a green van parked outside of Sue's cabin at around 9 p.m. that evening. And this was a green van that they had not seen before. There were other neighbors that recalled seeing a brown car outside of the home with a flat tire. It's very likely that John and his friend Dana had hitchhiked back home, so one of these cars that they saw could have been that. These leads about the car try to lead to nowhere. Okay, dead ends. Detectives speak with the young boys that had slept inside the house that night again. And this time, the friend, 12-year-old Justin, reveals that he has been having nightmares about that night, and he is now able to recall seeing Sue with two men inside the house. One had a mustache with long hair, and the other was clean shaven with short hair, and they both wore glasses. He also states that one of the men had a hammer, and with his descriptions, they come up with this little slightly ridiculous looking composite sketch of what the assailants likely look like. Yeah, they were doing their best. Okay. And this is not all little Justin recalls. Justin also states that John and Dana had entered the home later and argued with the two men, which resulted in a very violent fight. He also says that Tina was taken out the back door of the cabin by one of the men. At this point, they begin to start looking at Sue's relationships with the neighbors a bit closer. Somebody knows something that they're just not saying. The first relationship that they deep dive into is Sue's relationship with Marilyn, Justin's mother. The two of them had attended the same typing class and had since developed a really nice bond with one another. One day, Marilyn confides in Sue about her husband being physically abusive. She says that her husband has anger issues and he often flies into a rage and will do so in front of her son. And child, to make him even less tolerable, he's recently become involved in the drug business with his friend Bo, who he now has living in their cabin as well. She really did not want Bo there. She didn't like any of the things that he was about. He had a long history of robbery, violence, home invasions, even ties to the mob. And with this, Sue advises Marilyn to leave her husband. And she uses her own life as an example of how it may be a little difficult and it may take some courage, but it's definitely possible to leave such a situation and it's worth it. Well, somehow Martin had been made aware of this advice that Sue had given his wife, and he becomes irate. Some thinking enough to have committed such a gruesome act. Rumors began to spread that he had done this for revenge, and Bo, who had made several passes at Sue and had been rejected each time, had likely helped him. The FBI only works with them for about a month before they feel like, okay, I think y'all got it from here. So they back off and allow them to finish out the investigation, and the local police go and speak with Bo. The two of them had been spotted out at a bar the night of the attack and had reportedly been dressed in suits like there was some special occasion and acting very, very oddly. Now, Bo tells police that yes, they were at the bar, but they had left around 10 p.m. But then he later corrects himself and says, no, it was closer to about midnight when they had left. Now, the day of the murders, Marilyn had decided once and for all that she was done with her marriage, and Martin had left town for Reno, Nevada. In a letter that he later writes to his wife, Marilyn, he says, quote, I've paid the price of your love, and now that I've bought it with 4 people's lives, you tell me we're through. And this sounds pretty bad on its own, yes. So Marilyn goes to the police and she basically says that her husband is kind of admitting to this. But with the context of the entire 3-page letter, it does sound like he is referring to the 4 children that he had left behind in his old relationship to come move in with Marilyn and play house with her and her son. He speaks a lot about their 4 lives being impacted and how he kind of sacrificed time with them to be with her and make her happy. And now she just wants to throw it all away. So with that, police don't feel like they have reason enough to continue to look at him as a suspect. Then 3 months into the investigation, the lead detective resigns and takes a job elsewhere. Now around this time, rumors have begun to circulate that he had figured out who was responsible for the Keddie cabin murders, and instead of bringing them in for justice, had advised them to get out of town. It also did not help the fact that the sheriff and Martin Smart were known to be very friendly enough for people to believe he would help him cover this up. But the sheriff denies that any of that is true and says that during the time that they had looked at Martin as a suspect, they had required him to take a polygraph test, which he had passed. Nearly 3 years after this murder had taken place, in April of 1984, a man collecting bottle caps nearly 100 miles away from Keddie finds a partial human skull and a mandible bone as he is collecting his things and immediately calls 911. But it's another call that they received days later on the 3rd-year anniversary exactly of the Keddie murders that shocks them the most. This anonymous caller suggests that the remains that they had heard were found were the remains of Tina Sharp. The caller basically says that 12-year-old girl Tina Sharp that was never found, just wondering if y'all thought about that. Later, DNA analysis confirms that the remains did in fact belong to 12-year-old Tina. And of course, her COD cannot be determined at this point. A search of the area surrounding turns up a blue nylon jacket, a pair of jeans with the pocket ripped off, and an empty medical tape dispenser. Very obviously all related to the Keddie cabin incident. They questioned if the caller is their actual suspect or if they just so happen to know about the Keddie murders and recall that Tina was never located, just put two and two together. They are unable to identify this caller, and for the next couple of years, again, the case goes cold. They make no leeway in the investigation. In 1988, Bo dies, and 2 years later, in the year 2000, Martin dies of cancer. In 2008, a documentary comes out where Marilyn is interviewed, and she says, without a shadow of a doubt, that she believes that Bo and her ex-husband were responsible for the killings. She also makes a claim that she had found a bloody jacket in the basement of their home and had quickly turned it over to police, but there is no record of this ever taking place. And she says it's because they covered it up. And she's also running with that theory that the sheriff at the time had told her husband to get out of town. Remember, he left the day of the murders. And in this documentary, she also states that her husband had hated the oldest son, John, with a passion. But without any evidence tying either of them to the scene, there's no way to prove beyond hearsay that they had anything to do with this. Aside from another hammer being located in a now dried up pond, they don't really make any more progress with the case. That hammer was believed to have been one of the many weapons used, but of course, there's no DNA on it, so that's pretty much all that they get from that discovery. Not much else is uncovered in the case until 2016, when the new investigators looking over the case come to find that a counselor had come forward in May of 1981, just a month after the killings, claiming that Martin had confessed to killing both Sue and Tina. And when the counselor had asked about the teenage boys, he said that he had nothing to do with the boys, but he did not say who did. This counselor made the police that were investigating the case at the time aware, but it was dismissed as hearsay. One of the current investigators goes to speak with the counselor, who is located in Reno, Nevada, where Martin had officially run off to, and the counselor's story is the same. They revealed that, according to Martin, he was upset with Sue over the advice that she had given his wife. She had successfully convinced Marilyn to leave him, and he was that angry with her for that. He said that he never intended to hurt anyone else, and that he had only taken Tina because she had witnessed the entire thing, and he did not want to leave her behind, able to identify him. Now, one theory that is developed is that Martin and Sue were actually having an affair, and Sue was counseling Marilyn to leave her husband so she could have him, and then he became angry by that still and solicited the help of his friend to help him omit Sue from the picture. I don't know where that theory came from, whether it came from the rumors or the actual investigators, but it came from somewhere. And it was one that they were definitely considering. Now, although Bo and Martin have at this point now both been gone for a long time, the investigation is still ongoing because investigators believe that there were more than a handful of people involved in this whole incident. It may have just been Martin and Bo at the house by themselves, but they believe that they were helped with the cleanup, the cover-up, of course, and a little accessory after the fact. And those people, they believe, are still alive and deserve to be punished for their roles. Until this day, no charges have been filed and no one's been arrested. And little Jamie Seabolt from next door almost got himself caught up because a little bit of his DNA had been found at the scene, and he had left out the part initially that he did more than help those boys out of the window. He had actually later gone back into the house, entering from the rear to take a look around. You got to be careful tiptoeing around them crime scenes. Anytime I'm somewhere and like a fingernail, like clipping falls or like a piece of skin, honestly, I'm always, maybe I'm delusional, maybe it's crazy to think this way, but I always question like, what if a crime is committed here and then they find my little piece of toenail, girl? Now they want to come arrest me because they think I was there. And I was, but I wasn't. And I got a lot of thoughts on this, so I'm going to share my thoughts, okay? First of all, I don't believe for one bit the theory of them having an affair. She didn't want her own husband with that Ike Turner spirit on him. Why would she want Marilyn? I believe that she told that lady to leave her husband and he got upset and took his little friend around there. And if he hated the son too, then of course this adds up. I think that in the midst of him confronting or attacking Sue, her son and his friend showed up. The friend was just a casualty of their war, unfortunately. And he took Tina because, like he said, Tina had seen it all. Now, whether or not Justin knew this was his stepfather, I'm unsure, because initially he said he slept through everything, but then later on, they are able to get out of him all this information, but he still doesn't say it's his stepdad. At first, I was thinking that maybe Martin, the stepdad, had planted this information in his stepson, and it was his idea for the stepson to give them this like fake description of how the assailants looked. Then I also thought maybe they had on a little piece of disguise, just enough for him genuinely not to recognize them. I also doubt the theory about the affair, because why would his friend Bo constantly hit on Sue if they were having an affair? And I think Bo was about to try to essay her, and that's why she was found the way that she was, but he was unsuccessful for whatever reason. Martin had also mentioned his claw hammer being stolen from his toolbox in his garage before anyone was made aware of which weapons were used. I definitely believe that sheriff, he knew. He found out, he told him to get out of town, just like people speculated, on some old small town corruption. And I bet a lot of the townspeople and the neighbors knew the truth and turned a blind eye even that night when they heard her screaming. There is no way that cabin 16 heard screams and cabin 27, 26, 24, 25 heard nothing. Cabin 27 is 15 feet away from Sue's cabin. Very sad ordeal all around. Sue Sharp's surviving children went to stay with an aunt in California. Unfortunately, they were later placed into foster care because apparently the aunt had a lot of children of her own and she ultimately couldn't take care of them all. Sheila has since spoken about the incident publicly in several interviews, and she does not talk to her brothers about the incident at all because she wants to protect them. And that's just not a conversation she wants to have with them. She was very glad that they were able to be spared such a horrific scene. Cabin 28 has since been demolished, and that entire site for housing has since been abandoned. And that is the end of it. Let me know your thoughts down below. Don't forget to like the video before you leave. Subscribe if you have not. As always, I appreciate you so much for spending your time with me, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Peace. The leaves scurrying around in the background. I'm on second coffee this morning. What are you doing? Oh, she about to start on Elephantasia. Y'all, this case that we're getting into make sure you click the link in the bio or I'm like double fisting sparkling water and coffee. Definitely give an adult. Why is it so dark in here all of a sudden? In 1979, Glenna Sue Sharp, come on now, not today, believes her ex-husband, no, really blue? By the fall of the next year after she looked, when they speak with the youngest children who had said, they had not heard a thing. There were knife marks in the wall. All they could do is all that they can conduce. Is that a word? And I think that's the word I was trying to say. I got a headache. No, it's deduce. That's what I was trying to say. That's crazy. All that they could deduce from what they have before them, no, let's just leave the deuce out, girl. And it's quite obvious to them that this had taken place over an extended amount of time. This really blue, likely hitchhiked back, even ties to the mob. And with this, definitely believed that well, look who it is.